Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is Martin Indyk. He was a former U.S. Special Envoy for the Israeli-Palestinian negotiations under President Barack Obama. He previously served in senior positions, both at the State Department and in the White House under President Bill Clinton. He was also twice U.S. Ambassador to Israel. He's now a distinguished fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He joins us via satellite from New York City. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Indyk.
My pleasure, Mark.
Mr. Indyk, as I indicated in your biography, you spent basically your entire professional career dealing with U.S. policy in the Middle East. However, you've reached a conclusion, which you put out in an essay in the Wall Street Journal, and the title of this essay is "The Middle East Isn't Worth It Anymore." Can you explain how you reached that conclusion?
Well, Mark, of course, headlines don't exactly capture a 2,000-word argument, but essentially what I'm saying is that the United States needs to reassess its interests in the region, that it has today very few vital interests. And I try to draw a distinction between what's vital and other interests, but vital interests are those that the nation should be prepared to go to war for, or to invest a lot of diplomatic energy and prestige for. I argue in the piece that things have changed in the Middle East, and it's time to recognize that because of changes in the oil market in particular, we don't have a vital interest in the free flow of oil from the Gulf at reasonable prices, something which really drove American policy for the last 4 decades. And I also argue that we don't have a vital interest in making peace between Israel and the Palestinians, something that is particularly hard for me to admit because I've essentially devoted my life to Arab-Israeli peacemaking.
Right. So in a way, Donald Trump is right when he says, we shouldn't be dealing with those foreign wars, especially in the Middle East, although it's not always reflected in reality.
Well, that's exactly right. It wasn't Donald Trump who first said it. It was President Barack Obama who was elected on a similar platform to Trump's of ending America's endless wars in the Middle East. These two presidents could not be more different in everything except this one thing, that they have both recognized that the American public was weary of wars in the Middle East, and that the investment of a vast amount of blood and treasure on the part of the United States had actually been quite counterproductive, and we had not achieved our objectives. So that I think in that sense, they're both recognizing a certain reality about American war weariness, but they did not come to terms, neither of them, with what I'm arguing, which is that our interests have changed. It's not just that we're not doing very well by applying our force, but that our interest in doing so is no longer there. And I try to use that to explain this toing and froing on the part of both Obama and Trump, that because they haven't come to terms with the change in our interests, we keep on getting sucked back in, despite the determination of these two presidents to get out. And nevertheless, we see in the case of Donald Trump that we have now more than 60,000 troops in the region. He just sent in another 14,000, despite the fact that he keeps on saying, I'm pulling out the troops.
Right. The best example of that, both for Obama and Trump, being Iraq. Obama wanted to pull out of Iraq. He was forced to go back in. And we're now seeing, especially after the killing of Iran's top general Qasem Soleimani by the U.S., that Iraq is again a place where U.S. troops will likely stay for the foreseeable future.
Or not. It's not clear. The Iraqi parliament has voted, although not very convincingly, to remove the American troops. And Trump
would you argue in favor of such a withdrawal?
No, I argue that we can protect our interests with smaller footprints. Our footprint in Iraq at the moment is only 5,000 troops. Our footprint in Syria is only 1,000 troops, probably a little less than that now. And we can protect our interests, particularly when it comes to mopping up operations against ISIS with that kind of footprint. What matters is for us collectively as a nation to define our interests so that our objectives are consistent with the means that we are prepared to put forward to achieve them. And part of the problem we've had, again, notwithstanding President Obama and President Trump's desire to get out of the region, is the declaration of these grandiose objectives, such as Secretary of State Pompeo's declaration that our objective in Syria is to remove every Iranian boot, quote unquote. And yet the Iranians have thousands, tens of thousands of Shia militias that they control in Syria, including and then there's the IRGC, and we have no means to achieve that objective. So we shouldn't be declaring it. Calling for the overthrow of the Ayatollahs in Iran, something which Trump has avoided doing, but others around him seem set on pursuing as an objective, is another example of grandiosity. And with the rumours that Trump is about to announce his plan for the deal of the century, peace between Israel and the Palestinians, is another example of grandiosity. And since we're not prepared to put forward the means to achieve any of these objectives, we shouldn't be declaring them.
Right.
But saying that we're going to keep some troops in the region to deal with the residual threat from ISIS is certainly something that we need to do. It's in our interest to do, and that we can do.
Right. I want to go to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. You were the last to basically shepherd talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians back in 2013, 2014. Clearly now the two-state solution is more or less dying, and the Trump administration stands on the settlements, saying they no longer violate international law, seem essentially to put an end to this. Are you concerned that the deal of the century will essentially mean the burial of the two-state solution?
Well, you know, the Holy Land is a place for burials and resurrections. And so even when it's dead, it's usually not buried. And that's certainly true of the Arab-Israeli and Israeli-Palestinian peace process, notwithstanding a long history of Americans putting forward their peace plans and having them rejected. Nevertheless, the peace process, however dead it looks at any particular moment, seems somehow to spring back to life. And that's for a very good reason, because Israelis in particular, but also Palestinians, need to reconcile, need to change the way that they interact, need to find a way to end their conflict. That is a vital interest, I argue, for Israel. It in particular faces this dilemma between whether it's going to be a Jewish state or a democratic state. I hope, and it's in American interest, to help Israel retain its identity as both Jewish and democratic. But it can't do that if it continues to occupy the Palestinians and rule over them to the point where they will soon become a majority in the area that Israel controls.
Would the annexation of the West Bank put an end to this hope?
Yes, I think at least for the time being, if Israel were to annex the West Bank, it would be put an end to the chances for reconciliation between Israel and the Palestinians, and it would set back relations between Israel and Jordan. The Jordanians may actually cancel their peace treaty if they were to do that. So it's a big mistake for Israel to make in its own interests. As a friend of Israel, as a nation that has put a great deal of economic, military and political support behind Israel, We have a duty as its friend to advise it not to do this. We have a duty as its friend not to encourage it to do this.
But is it what the Trump administration is doing? On the contrary, it seems it's encouraging by the stance on the settlements, by moving the embassy. It seems essentially to encourage Israel to do this, no?
I agree. And I think that's a huge mistake. But the point that I'm trying to make is that it is no longer a vital interest of the United States whether Israel resolves its conflict with the Palestinians. It's vital for the survival and well-being of the Jewish and democratic state of Israel.
Right,
but it's not a vital interest of the United States.
I understand.
Our vital interest was Israel's survival and security, and we have helped Israel take care of that problem. It no longer faces an existential threat, and we need to come to terms with that. The Iranians can talk about destroying Israel, as they seem to want to do every other week, but they don't have the means to do that. And the reality is that Israel has the means to destroy Iran. Hopefully it'll never come to that.
And so in a nutshell, you think that no U.S. mediating role is needed anymore to find a peace between Israel and the Palestinians? They should just do it themselves?
No, I think that they should decide to do it themselves. And when both sides, and I emphasize both sides, are willing to take the necessary risks and make the necessary compromises that would enable a reconciliation, an end of conflict and peace to be achieved, and they come to the United States and say, we're ready, then we should be ready to help them. But the idea that we should come forward with our plan and tell them both to accept it when they have no interest in doing so is a farce. And we shouldn't be in that business.
Martin Indyk, thank you very much for your time, and thank you all for watching this interview here on France 24. Stay tuned for more news.